At this point, it's highly likely that a storm system will move through the Midwest and Northeast and bring major snowfall, where many areas could experience over a foot of snow. If we were to take a look at the latest forecast run of the European model, we have seen some interesting changes regarding not only the exact magnitude of how much snowfall you should receive, but the exact trajectory and the areas where you could receive snowfall, where even portions of the coastal Northeast could get involved with some snowfall by next week. If we were to continue to move forward with the European model, of course, right now it's primarily quiet throughout most of the United States. The jet stream is pretty straightened out, so of course that won't create a highly unstable environment for any sort of major weather events to occur in the atmosphere. And if we were to continue to move forward, we do see that there's going to be a small clipper system moving through the northern Midwest. So by the early week, you need to watch out for some isolated snow showers, anywhere from 1 to 3 inches of snow, and should bring some snow in the interior Northeast as well. But the big storm system we're of course focusing on is this low pressure system that's expected to move ashore by early next week, where we do see a large area of snow extending from the Pacific Northwest as far east as Minnesota and Iowa. So this is a very elongated storm system, and there's plenty of cold air behind it to continue to fuel this storm and to continue to enhance the instability as this moves more and more towards the midsection of the country. And continuing to move forward, we see that this storm system continues to move further southward into Southern California, where we do see a heavy amount of snow throughout the higher elevations of Arizona, Utah, Nevada also gets involved, and long cold air throughout the Pacific Northwest, as well as pretty much the entirety of the West Coast. So you need to pay close attention to the possibility of heavy snow and very cool temperatures as we approach next week, where there's going to, especially in the higher elevations, you could experience well over a foot of snow and potentially over 2 feet of snow in some localized areas of the Rocky Mountain ranges. And continuing to move forward, we do see that eventually this low pressure system will of course encounter the very warm air mass that's located in the southeastern portion of the United States, thanks to this big ridge that's being built right over the East Coast at this time, which has been a common trend we've been seeing throughout the winter, where we've just seen a very strong ridge pretty much parked right over the East Coast, which has been preventing a lot of snow from moving into the Northeast because it's bringing such a strong southerly flow that temperatures are too warm to support precipitation in the form of snowfall right up along the East Coast. However, in this case, for the northern Midwest, you should experience plenty of snowfall, and this warm air we're seeing associated from this southerly flow that this ridge is creating is going to create a highly unstable environment for this storm to continue to strengthen, and we see the precipitation elongate even more. The pressure drop of this low pressure system, it drops down to 983 millibars, and we see very, very heavy snow in the northern Midwest, where Minneapolis, you are, at least based on what the computer models are saying, are expected to receive over a foot of snow. That still could change. I want to emphasize that we're still 5 days out, but the fact that both the GFS and the European model are very persistent on bringing this scenario to the northern Midwest makes it likely that you will experience those major impacts. And moving forward, we do see that the northern Midwest especially experiences snowfall that's very, very heavy. And look at how large the area of pink is. There is that possibility of freezing rain as well, because there's going to be just enough of a northeasterly flow converging with a southwesterly flow, and that typically creates very powerful freezing rain threats in the United States when we see a northeasterly flow and a southwesterly flow converge. And look at how elongated again this snow is, extending as far west as Montana and as far east as Connecticut and Massachusetts. So again, for a lot of the bigger a lot of the northeast coastal cities and even the areas further southward in the Great Lakes region, this will be more of a rain event than a snow event. Maybe Chicago gets involved with a little bit of mixing before it entirely changes over to rain. And I think that there's going to need to be a big change in the forecast to see that snow move into Chicago. There's still that possibility. You're still relatively close to the rain snow line around the Chicago area, but I'd say more likely than not, it'll be more of a rain event event than a snow event for Chicago, but I wouldn't rule out the possibility that maybe you could experience some winter weather. And this includes Detroit as well. It's going to be a relatively close forecast for you guys, but more likely it's going to be more of a rain event than a snow event. And for New York City, Philadelphia, it's highly certain at this point that at least for this storm system, it will be a rain event. But that does not necessarily include the next storm system, which I'm going to talk to you guys about in just a sec, which could bring some snow right up along the East Coast, which would be your first major snowstorm of the season. But moving back to this current snowstorm, we see very large area of snow. Many areas in this scenario would experience over a foot of snow. This would occur right around the late Wednesday into the Thursday time frame, and even into late Friday for the northeast. So this will be a long duration event, especially since the storm, like I said, is so elongated and there's plenty of instability. However, as the storm moves eastward, it'll weaken just a little bit as the instability will reduce as this continues to move further eastward. The jet stream will be less pronounced. It'll be more straightened out by the time this approaches northeast, but we'll still see plenty of snow throughout the northern Midwest, and then the snow will eventually move out, bringing a large area of 6 to 12 inches of snow throughout the northern Midwest and Northeast. However, it becomes interesting when we take a look beyond that point into the weekend time frame, because as the storm system moves out, we're going to see this initial ridge that was forcing the low pressure system further northward to begin the weekend and also move westward. And that's key because as this ridge continues to move further westward, the northeast would experience less of a southerly flow that would push the warm air to the northeast, and more of a westerly to even northwesterly flow that would bring a little bit more cold air for the northeast to support snowfall as we approach next weekend. And continuing to move forward, we see that the ridge begins to weaken, and we see the ridge move a little bit westward closer to Florida and closer pretty much further inland in the United States. And that's interesting because there's going to be another low pressure system right behind this big low pressure system that's going to move again off the California coast and then eventually move into the Midwest. And it's expected that there's going to be just enough instability to where this will create some convection and snowfall just to the north of this low pressure system just behind it. And we do see that this ridge right here is a lot weaker, and we see another ridge, a smaller ridge that's located just to the north of it. However, this ridge is far west enough to bring that stronger northeasterly flow to the northeast to allow that cold air to filter in the coastal cities. So as a result, we see a heavy snowfall threat where some areas would experience 6 to 12 inches of snow associated with this, especially in New England, where Philadelphia, New York City, Boston, Hartford, Providence all get involved with heavy snowfall in this scenario. Now, you're probably thinking that this is so far out. We've seen a scenario like this a million times this winter where it wants to bring snow to the coastal northeast, but then it doesn't end up coming for fruition, which is definitely true. That could be another one of those scenarios. Really all depends on position of this ridge, because if this ridge is again a little bit stronger than anticipated and a little bit further eastward, then that would prevent the northeasterly flow from moving into the northeast, and as a result, that would force a stronger southerly flow for the temperature to be a little bit too warm for snow for the coastal northeast. So we need to see if this forecast maintains itself. However, it's important to point out that the GFS model is also not only in agreement that it wants to bring snow to the coastal northeast, but it's taking a very similar trajectory and a very similar snowfall accumulation forecast as the European model, which could indicate that the certainty for this storm system is a little bit higher than what you'd expect for a storm system that's around 8 days out. So that's definitely something to keep in mind with this forecast as well. It's still far from uncertain, but the fact that both the computer models are in agreement could be an indication that maybe the Northeast could be in for some snow with this specific snowstorm. But I'll keep you guys updated over the next several days. Now let's take a look at the GFS model, which has been showing a very similar forecast to the European model, but with a couple of differences. Taking a look at the GFS model, very similar forecast for the next several days, including this big storm system that's, of course, going to move into the west coast, bringing heavy snowfall throughout the higher elevations and continuing to move forward. The key difference, however, is that the GFS model wants to bring the rainfall further northward and, of course, the snowfall further northward. So in areas like Milwaukee, you're experiencing less snowfall and mainly freezing rain or wintry mix threat rather than a snow event. So Milwaukee wouldn't experience snowfall accumulation in this scenario, and for Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, it is entirely a rain event. But the GFS model is sort of very similar for the most part to the European model at this time. Just want to take the rain snow line a little bit further northward. So I'll say that with this current snowstorm, this first storm system that's expected to move through by next week, the certainty is relatively high at this point that it'll impact this general area. There could, of course, be variations in the forecast. We're still 5 days out, but it seems like both computer models have been very persistent on this idea. So I will say that certainty for this storm system is relatively high at this point, and you need to prepare as if this storm system is going to impact you guys if you're in the line of fire when it comes to snowfall accumulation. But moving forward beyond this storm system, the GFS model also is very certain, very similar to, is showing a scenario that's very similar to the European model at this time, where it wants to bring a similarly strength low pressure system moving at a similar trajectory and a similar area of snow and rainfall. So the certainty certainly is higher thanks to the agreement we're seeing between the two computer models. But 8 days out, so a lot of time to iron out the forecast. Gonna really need to determine the position of this ridge. Let me show you guys that in the 500 millibar height anomaly. So this is a 500 millibar height anomaly based on the GFS model's latest forecast run. We do see that this storm system is going to encounter a very strong ridge that's going to force the low pressure system further northward, relegating the snowfall further northward, where we do see the ridge is extremely strong in this scenario. And moving forward, we do see that this ridge is too strong to bring that cold air to the northeast. So of course it'll be entirely a rain event unless you're in the interior portions of the Midwest. Minneapolis should expect over a foot of snow. But moving forward beyond that point, once the storm system passes through, we of course see this ridge begin to weaken and the center of this ridge move westward. And that's key because unlike the southerly flow, the northeast and pretty much the entirety of the east coast was seeing associated with this ridge, where the winds are now going to shift to more of a westerly to even a slight northwesterly direction, which would allow the cold air to filter in for the possibility of snow to move in as the snow pressure system continues to move further eastward. Where we do see this ridge weaken significantly and we see a pretty significant jet stream dip and the winds shift completely to bring that Arctic air further southward and bring that snow into the northeast, where we see the ridge completely shift, where it now wants to bring a strong northwesterly flow as this ridge continues to weaken. And the European model is showing a very similar scenario. So this is what the European model is forecasting within the same time period. Of course, a very strong ridge that's very similar in strength to what the GFS model is stating. So of course, this low pressure system will move just north of this ridge. But beyond that point, we see the ridge again weaken, just like the GFS model is stating. And that allows the cool air to move in. That allows the winds to shift to the point where that will bring the Arctic air into the northeast for a higher possibility of snowfall thanks to this weakening ridge as the slow pressure system continues to head further eastward. So that would definitely be a big factor when determining if the northeast will experience snowfall or not. How much will this ridge weaken, and if this ridge will be able to move further westward to allow the northwesterly winds to build in northeast to bring that Arctic air further southward and of course allow for that possibility of snowfall. We're just going to need to wait and see. But for this first storm system, it's highly likely that this ridge will be strong enough to bring the heaviest snowfall further northward, and temperatures will be cold enough throughout the northern Midwest for a heavy snowfall threat, which is highly likely at this point. So make sure to keep that in mind if you're in the northern Midwest. Even when we compare the snowfall accumulation forecast, both of the computer models are showing very similar scenarios. We see that the GFS model wants to bring 6 to 12 to a large area of 12 to 24 inches throughout Minnesota, the northern portions of Wisconsin, Michigan, and even into North Dakota, as I'd say it's highly likely at this point. So make sure to prepare for that possibility of heavy snowfall. And we do see for much of the Northeast, it is associated with this second snowstorm. You could experience a large area of 3 to 6 inches of snow, and the European model is showing a very similar forecast when it comes to snowfall accumulation. Here's the European model's forecast, where we do see, again, very similar to the GFS model, pretty much bringing 6 to 12 inches, 12 to 18 inches in a lot of the similar areas, and even the coastal cities like New York City, Philadelphia, and Boston gets involved with very heavy snowfall from the combination of these, at least more so from this second snowstorm that's going to move through by next weekend. So I'll keep you guys updated over the next several days regarding the changes in the forecast. So this is my current forecast when it comes to snowfall. Of course, this forecast is subject to change. There's still a lot of days for the forecast to really iron itself out. I'll make necessary updates as we continue to see the computer models shift their forecast. But in a large area of Minnesota, North Dakota, and Wisconsin, you could expect over a foot of snow as of right now. A large area of 6 to 12 inches of snow. And this forecast becomes even more uncertain when we take a look at the coastal Northeast. The 3 to 6 inches right now is merely a placeholder, I'll say. So take it with a huge grain of salt, but there is that possibility of a snowstorm by next weekend. So just be aware of that along the coastal Northeast. But thank you guys for watching.